What's up, agents, and welcome back to another Division video. We're going to talk all about the Stack Broker, this thing that we've all been given today. A couple of us got a few extra shiny skins with it, depending on how long you have played the Division. This is the gold one, being the fact that I played ever since, like, I don't know, Div 1 Alpha or Beta or whatever. We've got the silver one as well. And then we've got the bronze one as well. But I must admit, not being biased or anything, the gold one does look really, really nice. Now, the reason I've kind of done this kind of maths type video for this is because it's not a bug, which I think some people seem to think that it is. But we have got two different perfect stats. Now, the perfect stat is probably what we should stop calling it, because you always would assume perfect would be better. And what actually happens with this is, if we put on my ACS 12, you can see, I'll put a rock and roll on, it's the same. But you can see here that the Stat Broker actually has a lower damage, has a lower base damage, but it does have a higher RPM. And the reason I wanted to, well, the reason I had the Lexington on was, if you've got one of these, you'll see here that this has a perfect stat here. It has a raised base damage stat as opposed to this. And although this has a lower, they've still made it yellow to kind of just indicate that there is a change in that base damage. So the question is with this, is it actually any good? Well, I mean, you only have to fire the thing to start believing that this thing is pretty good. Yeah, alright, it's a bit bouncy, it must be wild on controllers, but obviously it does put in the work. And if you put it on a striker's set, you know, obviously you're going to get weapon handling and rate of fire. If I actually equip the actual gun, that weapon handling actually does wonders along with the rate of fire. It's actually pretty crazy. You can see there at the bottom, it took no time at all to build up Strikers, Obliterate and Brazen. So that is pretty cool. Effectively now the mag size is the problem. But is it good for actually doing what it's named after? Is it good for actually building stacks? In comparison to the ACS 12 or the rock and roll. And the reason I talk about the rock and roll is that has a special talent. It has 50% extra magazine size. So it actually has 30 instead of the 20 that we get with the ACS 12 or the Stat Broker variants that we've got. And we've got a couple of sets in the game, you know, require stacking, which stand out obviously are going to be Strikers and obviously are going to be Heartbreaker. Heartbreaker having two variants, a 50 and 100 stack, and Strikers having two variants also, the 100 and the 200 stacks. And what I was kind of wondering was, well, at what point does it at all, the extra magazine capacity in the rock and roll actually begin to pay off? Because it's going to shoot for longer without being hit by the reload speed that you are going to get. And I'm thinking, how, you know, you can see here 2.68 seconds is a significant amount of time. So to get to 200 stacks or get to 100 stacks or to 50 stacks, how is that exactly going to play out? And then we're obviously going to have to take into account how many times are you actually going to have to reload to get to that stack and things like that. Now, it's not necessarily as straightforward as what it sounds, because it's a shotgun. So when it builds stacks, and the reason why it builds stacks, you know, so quick, is that they're effectively one shot can hit up to 8 times, as you can see, because they're pellets in a shotgun. So that makes sense. So when you're building Strikers up, Heartbreaker or anything like that, you're effectively every shot adding 8 stacks at a time rather than just one. So that was part of the, you know, maths that you kind of have to do to kind of roll it all in and roll it all together. And then I had a quick chat with IKEA to make sure I wasn't going absolutely insane. And he mentioned that, well, actually, you know, what about in the situation for building stacks where you just use the stack broker to do an entire mag, but then maybe switch to your Lexington, which would be your main weapon of choice, and finish off building the stacks with that. You know, and you know, there's that to think about as well. And that was a great comment. The only thing that was a little bit disappointing was when it comes to weapon switching for that kind of scenario, the game doesn't seem to give us an actual stat of how long our weapons switching is going to be. You can see here from the weapon handling that I've got with strikers, it gives us a 15% boost in swapping it, but it doesn't actually tell us how many seconds that is. And I've not really drilled down into that much detail to add that to the stats, but just be aware that if that's the scenario you choose to go with, that weapon swap time will play into that factor. But don't forget anyway, even with any of the other examples, by the time you get to 100 stacks or 50 stacks or whatever, you are going to weapon swap, you know, to your Lexington or whatever else it is that you are running. So that reload time is potentially going to play in every single scenario. So let's get the boring bit over here on. Let's make it a bit bigger. All right, so I'm just going to show you the spreadsheet. I nabbed this top bit. Well, I've nabbed the rock and roll and the ACS 12 stats from IKEA sheet and then added in the stack broker. And as you can see here, we've got the base damage that is slightly lower. We've got the mag size here for the rock and roll that is increased, and I don't know why that is yellow. It doesn't need to be. Optimal range the same, but you can see here they actually play extremely similar when it comes to just using them for general DPS builds. I mean, we're forgetting about the stacking functions. The burst DPS is almost identical across the board. Sustained DPS though, the rock and roll does win out still because of that extended mag, because that's when sustained DPS counts and counts for reloads. And that then made me wonder a little bit more about what I was thinking about and if I was actually onto something. The stat broker for sustain actually comes in lesser, but I wouldn't worry about that too much if you're going to do a DPS build with it. Chances are you're going to want to be still killing things within one magazine. So it's the burst DPS that is actually the important factor, and they've actually balanced it extremely well when it comes to that factor. But it's a reward. Do we want it to be balanced extremely well? We didn't want the Lexington to be balanced extremely well, so there is that as well to think about. Now, with anything that you see here, there is no accounting for the bonuses that you get from the gear set. So for instance, the RPM increase from strikers is not included in any of this. I literally wanted to see that, is it going to work, you know, with the stacks? And essentially, if you want to add the 15% in, the winners are still going to be the same. It's going to be exactly the same. So yeah, we stayed away from any kind of extra interfering attributes is the right way to go about it. So first of all, we're talking about strikers 100 stacks. And as you can see here, there is no reload needed at all for any of the guns when it comes to building to a strikers to 100 stacks. And that is because they have a magazine of 20, and every time they hit, they do 8 shots. So we can quite easily work that out. So you can do 20, and you can times that by 8, and you can see there that we're going to hit 160 stacks with one full magazine. So that's easy enough to hit 100 stacks in. Obviously, this is actually as well down to accuracy and stuff and things like that. This is perfect world scenario. But there's no reloads needed at all for any of these builds. And as you can see here, the stat broker easily wins. It gets there in 2.17 seconds. The rock and roll and the ACS 12 then rock up just a little bit later at 2.6 seconds. Essentially, they have exactly the same stacks and the extra magazine size is not coming into play at all. So then let's just skip on to Heartbreaker. So Heartbreaker at 100 stacks is exactly the same for the 3 guns. So So if you are running the extended talent for the 100 stacks, you're going to have exactly the same results. And then you're also going to have very, very similar results if you run Heartbreaker without it. So you're only stacking up to 50 stacks. You can see here the total time needed is 1.17 seconds, which seems absolutely wild that you can do it that quick. But obviously, this is again saying that you're hitting every single one of them pellets on whatever it is you are shooting at. So it's not a real world scenario, but the Heartbreaker again is going to win out with the Stat Broker with 50 stacks, and then 1.4 again, because again, no reloads needed for any of this. But then this is where it gets a little bit more juicy and a little bit more interesting, because to hit 200 stacks, as we've just seen with the Stat Broker and the ACS 12, we're actually going to need a reload. So that is going to add an amount of time in. So let's just flip back to the game. We'll change to a build that has no reload bonus or anything built into it. But if we look at the Stat Broker, we're going to have to add in 3.05 seconds to the stack building process at that point, which again then delays the amount of time needed to get to the 200 stacks. So you can see here then at this point, actually, the Rock and Roll wins out. It actually gets there in 5 seconds flat, which is pretty good, with the Stat Broker coming in at 7.22 ahead of just the ACS 12 at 8.05. And I did this little chart here, little demonstration. It's not exactly to point of a digit, but you get the idea here. You can see the difference, right? You can see exactly here where we've got the build up with the Stock Broker. It pulls ahead essentially, so the time is the longer down the chart. But you can see the stock broker stack. I've called it the Stock Broker. The stack. Oh dear. The Stock Broker. The Stat Broker pulls ahead, but then it flatlines here because it has to reload. But it started to reload earlier, so then it comes up the curve again, and you know it. Before it hits 8 seconds, you can see there it gets to the 200 stacks required. The ACS 12 then coming in slower, needs to reload, and then finishes at around 8 seconds. And if you can see here, look, you can see that matches up 7.22 and 8 seconds. But then you can see here that the Rock and Roll, it doesn't need to reload, never has a flat line, and just finishes within 5 seconds. So then you're thinking, oh, righty then. So if I'm going to be running, you know, Striker's chess piece, should I be running the Rock and Roll and not necessarily bothering with the Stack Broker? Well, that's where the idea then when I was talking to IKEA came in. And you can see here that, remember, so our top time to beat now is 5 seconds. So if we use the Stack Broker and just put the entire magazine in, which we know is 180 stacks, we would then have to put the remaining 40 stacks in with our Lexington. Well, to do that, that's going to take 2.33 seconds with the RPM that we have here. And don't forget, if you are running this build with Strikers, you're going to do all this even quicker because it has the RPM boost. And it also has the weapon handling boost, so the reload will happen quicker as well as the weapon swap. So, you know, you've got all things boosting along the way if you are going to run with Strikers. But that actually is going to take us a 5.67 seconds. So it is actually 0.67 seconds slower than just using the rock and roll all the way through. It's probably close to 6 because we have to account for doing the weapon swap. So, you know, from this to that is probably getting to that 0.4, 0.5 half a second territory. So it's probably going to be closer to 6. But again, it still beats out the everything else, you know, in that category. So that is, and we talked about this earlier on a little bit, you are generally only building stacks to swap weapons anyway. So it does seem that if you are running the Striker's chess piece, the ideal scenario is still to run the Stack Broker but then once you get to the end of one full magazine, swap to your Lexington and away you go. Whereas with every other scenario, you've basically just got to eyeball it. When you probably get into about 90-95%, just weapon swap and switch to your Lexington because you've got max stacks. But I thought this was interesting. I thought it took me a long time to kind of math this out. So I wanted to make a video for it. So please do like, share, comment, subscribe. If you've not subscribed already, we're grinding to 40k. I really would appreciate it. But the gun itself isn't as standout as the Lexington was, but it is still essentially, for what it does, probably the best in slot. Just a slight caveat with the 200 stacks of strikers. Thanks for watching, agents, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.